The womanizing millionaire lost control after meeting his father's friend's innocent daughter. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She was the only woman in the room he couldn't buy. The crystal chandelier cast golden shadows across the mahogany dining room as Elias Varden adjusted his silk tie for the third time that evening. At 34, he had mastered the art of appearing effortlessly perfect. Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's monthly salary, a tailored navy suit that hugged his athletic frame, and that practiced smile that had opened bedroom doors from Manhattan to Miami. Tonight was supposed to be just another tedious business dinner. His father, Harrison Varden, had insisted on hosting their oldest business partner and his family at the estate. Networking, the old man had called it, though Elias suspected it was more about showing off their renovated dining room and vintage wine collection. Elias checked his Rolex, a nervous habit he'd developed during board meetings. The guests would arrive any moment, and he was already planning his escape route. Maybe he'd slip away after the main course, call up Brianna, or was it Bethany, the blonde model from last week's yacht party. They were all starting to blur together anyway. The heavy oak door creaked open, and his father appeared, his silver hair perfectly styled despite his 72 years. "They're here," Harrison announced, his voice carrying that commanding tone that had built empires. "And Elias, I want you on your best behavior tonight. Thaddeus Pierce has been my partner for over 20 years. His family deserves our respect." "Of course, Dad," Elias replied, slipping his phone into his jacket pocket. "When am I not respectful?" Harrison raised an eyebrow but said nothing. They both knew the answer to that question. As they walked toward the foyer, Elias mentally prepared himself for another evening of forced conversations and polite lies. He'd shake hands with Mr. Pierce, a man he'd met countless times at company functions but never really noticed. He'd compliment Mrs. Pierce on her dress, make small talk about the weather, and count the minutes until he could retreat to his penthouse in the city. But as they reached the marble foyer, something shifted in the air. She entered like morning light breaking through storm clouds, quietly, without fanfare, yet impossible to ignore. The pale blue dress she wore wasn't designer. Elias could tell by the simple cut and modest neckline. Her dark curly hair was pulled back in a loose bun, with a few rebellious strands framing her heart-shaped face. She wasn't wearing the kind of jewelry that usually caught his attention. No diamonds, no gold, just small pearl earrings that seemed to glow against her smooth, dark skin. What stopped him cold wasn't her beauty, though she was undeniably beautiful. It was the way she carried herself. While every other woman he knew entered a room like they owned it, she stepped inside like she was grateful to be invited. Her dark eyes swept the opulent foyer, taking in the marble columns, the priceless artwork, the grand staircase. But instead of the calculated assessment he was used to seeing, there was genuine wonder in her gaze. "Elias," his father's voice seemed to come from somewhere far away. "I'd like you to meet Thaddeus Pierce and his family." The older man stepped forward, tall, lean, with work-roughened hands and kind eyes. "Mr. Varden, thank you for having us in your beautiful home." Elias shook his hand, noting the firm grip of a man who'd built his success through honest labor rather than inheritance. But his attention kept drifting to the young woman standing slightly behind her father, her hands clasped in front of her. "And this is my daughter, Savannah," Thaddeus said, his voice filled with unmistakable pride and protectiveness. She stepped forward, extending her hand with a grace that seemed natural rather than practiced. "Mr. Varden, it's a pleasure to meet you." Her voice was soft but clear, with a slight southern lilt that suggested small-town roots rather than big-city sophistication. When her fingers touched his, Elias felt something he couldn't quite name, a warmth that had nothing to do with physical attraction and everything to do with something deeper, something he'd never experienced before. "The pleasure is mine," he heard himself say, though his usual smooth confidence seemed to have deserted him. She looked up at him then, really looked, and for a moment time seemed suspended. Her eyes weren't calculating or flirtatious. They weren't trying to seduce or manipulate. They were simply honest, open, unguarded in a way that made him feel suddenly exposed, as if she could see through all his carefully constructed facades. Then she smiled, not the practiced, seductive smile he was accustomed to, but something genuine and warm, and looked away, her cheeks coloring slightly. "Savannah just finished her master's degree in early childhood education," Thaddeus was saying, his hand resting protectively on his daughter's shoulder. "She's thinking about opening her own school someday." That's wonderful, Elias managed, though he found himself struggling to form coherent sentences. When was the last time he'd been tongue-tied around a woman? As Harrison led the Pierce family toward the dining room, Elias hung back, watching the way Savannah walked, unhurried, observant, pausing to admire a painting or the fresh flowers his housekeeper had arranged. She didn't seem impressed by the wealth surrounding her, merely appreciative, like someone who understood the difference between luxury and beauty. During dinner, she sat across from him, speaking when spoken to, but never trying to dominate the conversation. She listened more than she talked, asked thoughtful questions about his father's business, and laughed at Thaddeus's stories about their small hometown with genuine affection rather than embarrassment. "So, Elias," she said during a lull in conversation, her voice drawing his attention like a magnet, "your father mentioned you're involved in the company's expansion projects. That must be exciting." He almost choked on his wine. Most women asked about his cars, his houses, his plans for the weekend. None had ever shown interest in his actual work. "It is," he said, leaning forward slightly. "We're looking at developing some communities in the southeast, places that could really benefit from economic growth." Her eyes lit up with genuine interest. "That sounds like it could make a real difference in people's lives." The way she said it, without artifice, without calculation, made him want to tell her things he'd never shared with anyone, about his real dreams for the company, beyond just profit margins, about the plans he'd sketched out, but never dared to present to the board. As the evening wore on, Elias found himself studying her like a puzzle he couldn't solve. She declined the expensive wine, sipping water instead. She complimented the food, but didn't gush over it. When his father mentioned Elias's recent feature in Forbes magazine, she simply nodded politely, as if material success was expected rather than impressive. But it was the moment she excused herself to powder her nose that changed everything. As she stood to leave, she accidentally knocked over her water glass. Instead of waiting for the staff to clean it up, as every other woman in his life would have done, she immediately grabbed her napkin and began soaking up the water, apologizing softly. "Oh, I'm so sorry, how clumsy of me." "Miss, please let me," the server began, but she was already cleaning, her movements quick and efficient, as if taking care of messes was second nature. In that moment, watching her kneel beside her chair, genuinely concerned about a simple accident, Elias felt something crack open inside his chest, something he'd kept locked away for so long he'd forgotten it existed. When she returned from the restroom, she caught him staring. Their eyes met across the table, and for the second time that evening, the world seemed to pause. She tilted her head slightly, a question in her dark eyes, and he felt an overwhelming urge to tell her everything, about the loneliness he masked with conquest, about the emptiness he filled with excess, about the man he might have been if he'd ever met someone worth becoming better for. Instead, he simply smiled and looked away, but the damage was done. For the first time in his life, Elias Varden had met a woman who made him want to be worthy of her, and he had no idea how to begin. Have you ever met someone who made you question everything about who you thought you were? Someone so genuine that all your walls just crumbled. Elias has spent 34 years building his reputation as the untouchable playboy who could have any woman he wanted. But in just one evening, Savannah Pierce, a small-town girl with pearl earrings and honest eyes, has done something no supermodel or socialite ever could. She made him want to be worthy of her. What do you think will happen when a man who's never had to fight for anything meets the one woman who won't be easily won? Will Savannah see through his charm, or will she give him the chance to prove he can change? 3 days later, and he still couldn't get her voice out of his head. Elias stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor of Varden Tower, staring out at the Manhattan skyline without really seeing it. The city sprawled beneath him like a glittering playground he'd conquered years ago, but for the first time in his adult life, none of it held any appeal. His assistant, Camden, knocked and entered with his usual efficiency. "Your 11 o'clock is here, Mr. Varden. The meeting with the Henderson acquisition team." "Cancel it," Elias said without turning around. Camden paused, stylus hovering over his tablet. In 5 years of working for Elias, he'd never heard him cancel a multi-million-dollar deal. "Sir, this acquisition has been in the works for 6 months. Mr. Henderson flew in from Dallas specifically for—" "I said cancel it." Elias's voice was sharper than he intended. He ran a hand through his dark hair, then turned to face his assistant. "Reschedule for next week. Tell them something came up." Something had come up, though he couldn't explain what. Ever since that dinner 3 nights ago, he'd been walking around in a fog. He couldn't concentrate on contracts, couldn't focus on profit margins, couldn't even muster interest in the text messages from Brittany, or was it Bethany, inviting him to some gallery opening in Soho. After Camden left, looking thoroughly confused, Elias pulled out his phone and scrolled to his father's contact. He'd been thinking about this for days, crafting and recrafting the conversation in his mind. "Dad, it's me," he said when Harrison answered. "I've been thinking about the Pierce account." "What about it?" Harrison's voice carried the slight wariness of a man who knew his son too well. "Maybe I should get more involved. You know, hands-on oversight of their regional expansion. Make sure everything goes smoothly." There was a long pause. "Elias, Thaddeus Pierce has been handling his own expansion successfully for 20 years. He doesn't need babysitting." "I'm not talking about babysitting. I'm talking about partnership, building stronger relationships." The words sounded reasonable, even to his own ears. "Besides, didn't you always say the most important part of business is understanding the people behind the numbers?" Another pause, longer this time. "This wouldn't have anything to do with his daughter, would it?" Elias felt heat rise in his chest. "I don't know what you mean." "Son, I've watched you charm your way through half the eligible women in Manhattan, but I saw how you looked at that girl the other night, like she was the first woman you'd ever seen." The truth in his father's words hit like a physical blow. "It's not like that, isn't it?" Harrison's voice softened slightly. "Elias, Savannah Pierce isn't one of your socialites or models. She's a good girl from a good family. If you're thinking about playing games, I'm not playing games." The words came out more forcefully than he'd intended, surprising them both. The silence stretched between them until Harrison finally spoke. "Thaddeus mentioned she's been helping out at the Riverside Community Center while she's in town. Something about a reading program for underprivileged kids." Elias's pulse quickened. "The Riverside Center? We donated to them last year." "We did." Harrison's tone carried a warning. "And if you show up there tomorrow with some transparent excuse about checking on our investment, that girl is going to see right through you. She strikes me as the type who values honesty above everything else." After hanging up, Elias paced his office like a caged animal. His father was right. Showing up at the community center would be obvious, desperate even, but the alternative was waiting for another family dinner, another business meeting, another chance encounter that might never come. He'd built his reputation on taking what he wanted, without hesitation, but for the first time in his life, he was terrified of making the wrong move. That evening, instead of hitting his usual haunts, the exclusive clubs, the rooftop bars, the private parties, Elias found himself driving through Queens. He told himself he was just exploring, just getting a feel for the neighborhoods his company might develop. But when he found himself parked across from a small diner called Maggie's Kitchen, watching through the window as families shared simple meals, he finally admitted the truth. He was looking for her. The next morning, he stood in front of his walk-in closet, staring at rows of designer suits and Italian silk ties. Everything looked wrong, too expensive, too polished, too much like the man he'd always been, and not enough like the man he wanted to become. Finally, he selected dark jeans, a simple white button-down, and leather boots that had actually been worn before. Looking in the mirror, he barely recognized himself, but for the first time in years, he looked real. The Riverside Community Center occupied a converted school building in a neighborhood that gentrification hadn't yet discovered. The brick facade was weathered but well-maintained, with colorful murals painted by local artists, and a small garden where elderly volunteers tended to vegetables and flowers. Elias sat in his car for 10 minutes, engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals with heads of state, but walking into a community center to see a 22-year-old woman felt like the most terrifying thing he'd ever attempted. Through the front windows, he could see children running around, their laughter spilling out onto the street, and then he saw her. Savannah was sitting cross-legged on a colorful rug, surrounded by kids who couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. She held a picture book in her hands, her voice animated as she brought the story to life. Even from the distance, he could see how the children hung on her every word, their faces tilted up toward her like flowers following the sun. She was wearing jeans and a soft yellow sweater, her hair falling in loose curls around her shoulders. There was something so natural about the scene, so effortlessly beautiful, that Elias felt his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. A little boy with gap-toothed grin crawled closer to her, resting his head against her knee as she read. Without missing a beat in her storytelling, she gently stroked his hair, and the gesture was so tender, so instinctive, that Elias felt something fundamental shift inside him. This wasn't the woman from the dinner party, polite, reserved, careful. This was Savannah in her element, surrounded by the work she loved, with children who clearly adored her. This was who she really was, when she thought no one was watching. And suddenly, all his carefully planned approaches, all his strategies and techniques, felt foolish and inadequate. How could he compete with this? How could his world of boardrooms and bank accounts possibly interest someone who found such joy in reading stories to children? He was about to start the car and drive away when she looked up. Their eyes met through the window, and the story died on her lips. The children followed her gaze, turning to see what had captured their teacher's attention. For a moment that felt like eternity. They simply stared at each other across the distance. Him in his expensive car, her on the floor surrounded by books and building blocks and the simple magic of childhood. Then one of the children tugged on her sweater, demanding her attention, and the spell was broken. But as she turned back to the book, Elias saw something in her expression that made his heart race. She hadn't looked surprised to see him. She'd looked hopeful. And in that moment, Elias Varden realized he wasn't just pursuing a woman anymore. He was chasing the possibility of becoming the man she might actually want. "You're not very good at being subtle, are you?" Elias froze halfway out of his car, one foot still on the pavement, the other inside the vehicle as if his body couldn't decide between advancing or retreating. Savannah stood on the community center steps, arms crossed but not defensively, more like she was trying to keep herself warm in the October breeze. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," he started, but she held up a hand. "Disturb my reading session." "You didn't." The kids loved having an audience. Her lips curved into the slightest smile. "Though I'm pretty sure Mrs. Chen from the front desk is about to call security if you keep sitting out here staring at the building." Heat flooded his cheeks. When was the last time he'd blushed? "I wasn't staring at the building." "No," she said quietly, her dark eyes meeting his. "You weren't." The honesty in her voice stopped him cold. No games, no pretense, just acknowledgement of what they both knew was happening. It should have made things easier, but somehow it made everything infinitely more complicated. "Would you like to come in?" she asked, gesturing toward the building. "The kids have art time next, but I have a few minutes." Following her inside felt like crossing some invisible threshold. The interior smelled of crayons and apple juice, with children's artwork covering every available wall surface. Hand-painted signs pointed toward different rooms: reading corner, computer lab, dream big room. "It's not much," Savannah said, noticing his assessment, "but it serves the community. Some of these kids don't have books at home or quiet places to study. This gives them somewhere safe to be curious." They walked past a room where teenagers worked on laptops, past another where elderly volunteers taught children to knit, until they reached a small kitchen area with mismatched chairs and a coffee pot that had seen better decades. "Coffee?" she offered, already reaching for mugs. "Fair warning, it's terrible, but it's hot." "I'd love some." He accepted the chipped ceramic mug gratefully, wrapping his fingers around its warmth. The coffee was indeed terrible, but somehow that made it perfect. They sat across from each other at a small table scarred with years of use. For a moment, neither spoke, just sipped their coffee and listened to the sounds of children laughing in distant rooms. "So," Savannah finally said, "what's a man like you doing in a place like this?" There it was, the question he'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. He could lie, make up some story about checking on corporate donations or scouting potential development sites. The old Elias would have had a smooth answer ready, something charming and believable that would get him what he wanted without revealing anything real. Instead, he found himself telling the truth. "I wanted to see you again," he said simply. She set down her mug carefully, as if it might break. "Why?" "I don't know." The admission felt like jumping off a cliff. "I've been trying to figure that out for 3 days. It's not what you think." "What do I think?" He met her eyes, seeing nothing but genuine curiosity there. No judgment, no suspicion, just a quiet invitation to be honest. "You think I'm like every other rich guy who sees something he can't immediately have and decides he has to possess it." The words came out harder than he'd intended. "And maybe that's exactly what I am." "Is it?" she asked softly. The question hung between them like a bridge he could choose to cross or burn. Everything in his experience told him to deflect, to turn on the charm, to say what she wanted to hear. But something in her eyes, that same openness he'd noticed at dinner, made him want to try something he'd never attempted before, complete honesty. "I don't know," he repeated. I've never felt like this about anyone before. I don't even know what this is. All I know is that I haven't been able to think about anything else since I met you, and it's not because you're beautiful, though you are. It's because—" he trailed off, struggling to find words for something he'd never had to articulate. "Because?" she prompted gently. "Because you looked at me like I was just a person, not a bank account, not a connection, not a prize to be won, just a person. And I realized I haven't felt like just a person in so long. I'd forgotten what it was like." Savannah was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you want to know what I was thinking that night at dinner?" He nodded, not trusting his voice. "I was thinking that you looked lonely. Not bored, not arrogant. Lonely. Like you were surrounded by people but didn't really know any of them." She lifted her eyes to his. "And I wondered if maybe you were tired of being whoever everyone expects you to be." The accuracy of her observation hit him like a physical blow. She'd seen through everything. The designer clothes, the practiced smile, the carefully constructed image, and recognized something he'd been hiding, even from himself. "I'm tired," he admitted. "I'm exhausted by it." "Then why do you keep doing it?" "Because it's all I know. Because it's what's expected. Because—" He paused, then pushed forward into even deeper honesty. "Because I'm terrified that if I stop being what everyone expects, there might not be anything real underneath." Savannah reached across the table then, her fingers covering his. Her touch was warm, gentle, completely without agenda. "There is," she said with quiet certainty. "I can see it." "What can you see?" "Someone who cares more than he pretends to. Someone who's been playing a role for so long, he's forgotten it's not who he really is." Her thumb brushed across his knuckles. "Someone worth knowing." The simple words shattered something inside him. When was the last time anyone had said he was worth knowing? When was the last time anyone had tried to know him at all? "Savannah," he started, but she shook her head. "I need you to understand something," she said, her hand still covering his. "I'm not impressed by money or status, or any of the things that usually matter to people in your world. If you want to spend time with me, it has to be because you actually want to know who I am, not because you want to add me to some collection." "It's not like that," he said quickly. "Isn't it?" She pulled her hand back, and he immediately missed the warmth. "Because from where I'm sitting, this looks a lot like a very rich man who's used to getting what he wants, and I'm just the newest challenge." Her words stung because part of them rang true. How many times had he pursued women simply because they represented something he couldn't easily obtain? How many relationships had been built on conquest rather than connection? But this felt different. This felt— "You're right," he said finally. "Maybe that's how this started. Maybe I am used to getting what I want without having to really work for it. But sitting here with you, drinking terrible coffee, and talking about things I've never said out loud, this isn't about winning anything. This is about finding something I didn't even know I was looking for." She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth written there. "What are you looking for, Elias?" The question was so simple, so direct, that it cut through every defense he'd ever built. "Something real," he whispered. "Someone who sees me, not just what I have or what I can give them. Someone who makes me want to be better than I am. And you think I'm that someone?" "I think," he said carefully, "that you're the first person who's ever made me hope I could be." Outside, a child's laughter echoed through the October afternoon, but inside that small kitchen, two people sat in the fragile, terrifying space between strangers and something more, both afraid to hope, but unable to stop themselves from trying. 2 weeks later, and he was still there. Savannah glanced up from the stack of children's drawings she was organizing to see Elias through the community center window, unloading boxes from the back of a pickup truck. Not his usual sleek BMW or the Porsche she'd spotted him driving downtown, an actual pickup truck with mud on the tires and a small dent in the rear bumper. It was his 4th visit this week. The first time he'd shown up with a donation of new books for the reading program, not a corporate check mailed from his office, but actual books he'd personally selected and purchased. When she'd asked him about it, he'd shrugged and said he'd noticed some of the older books were falling apart. The second time he'd arrived during lunch hour and ended up helping in the kitchen, awkwardly attempting to serve mac and cheese to a line of hungry kids. Mrs. Chen had laughed until she cried watching him try to figure out the industrial-sized serving spoons. The third time, he'd simply sat in the back during story time, listening to her read Charlotte's Web to a group of 8-year-olds. When little Marcus had asked if the rich man was going to stay for snack time, Elias had looked so surprised by the casual acceptance that Savannah had felt something crack open in her chest. And now here he was again, carrying boxes of what looked like art supplies toward the front entrance. "He's back," announced Keisha, the center's program coordinator, sliding up beside Savannah with a knowing grin. "That's 4 times in 2 weeks. Either he's planning to relocate his entire business here, or someone's got it bad." "He's just being generous," Savannah replied, but even she could hear how unconvincing it sounded. "Honey, I've been running this place for 12 years. Rich folks donate money. They don't show up personally to serve lunch and read stories. That man's not here for tax deductions." Before Savannah could respond, the front door opened and Elias appeared, carrying 2 large boxes marked Art Supplies, Crayola. He'd traded his usual designer attire for jeans and a simple gray sweater, but somehow he still managed to look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Their eyes met across the lobby, and that now familiar flutter started in her stomach. 2 weeks of stolen conversations over terrible coffee, of watching him fumble through volunteer tasks with endearing determination, of catching him in unguarded moments when he forgot to be anything other than genuine, and she was no closer to understanding what was happening between them. "More supplies?" she asked, walking over to help. "The art teacher mentioned they were running low on crayons and construction paper," he said, setting the boxes down carefully. "I may have gotten a little carried away at the store." "A little?" She peered into one of the boxes and laughed, despite herself. There were enough art supplies to stock a small school. "Elias, this is too much." "Is it?" His voice was soft, uncertain in a way that made her look up at him. "I'm still figuring out how to do this." "Do what?" "Be useful. Be good. Be someone worth—" He stopped himself, but she heard the unfinished words anyway. "Be someone worth caring about." The vulnerability in his admission made her chest tight. Over the past 2 weeks, she'd watched him struggle with tasks that came naturally to others, interacting with children who didn't care about his net worth, performing mundane chores that served no purpose beyond helping, existing in a space where his usual advantages meant nothing, and slowly, carefully, she'd begun to see glimpses of who he might be beneath all the armor. "Mr. Elias!" The excited shriek came from Marcus, the 7-year-old who'd developed an obvious case of hero worship. The little boy came running across the lobby and launched himself at Elias with complete confidence that he'd be caught. Elias caught him, swinging him up with the natural ease that had surprised everyone, including himself. "Hey there, buddy. Ready for art class? Are you going to stay and draw with us?" Marcus asked hopefully. "I'm making a picture of my mom, but I can't get her smile right." Savannah watched as something soft crossed Elias's features. "I'd love to help, but I'm not very good at drawing." "That's okay," Marcus said with the matter-of-fact wisdom of childhood. "Miss Savannah says it's not about being good, it's about trying." The look Elias sent her over Marcus's head was so full of gratitude and something deeper that she had to look away. An hour later, she found them in the art room, Elias sitting cross-legged on the floor, completely absorbed in helping Marcus add details to his drawing. His expensive sweater was already decorated with crayon marks and what looked like glue, but he didn't seem to notice. "See, you have to make the smile lines go up," Marcus was explaining with serious concentration, "and then you add little crinkles by the eyes, because that's what happens when people are really happy. Like this." Elias adjusted his crayon strokes, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the small art supplies. "Perfect. She looks really happy now." Savannah leaned against the doorframe, watching as the man who commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals received drawing lessons from a 7-year-old. The sight was so incongruous, so genuinely sweet, that she felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. This wasn't the calculated charm she'd been prepared for. This wasn't manipulation or strategy. This was just a man who'd never learned how to be around children, trying his best because a little boy needed help drawing his mother's smile. After art class, when the children had been picked up and the center was beginning to close for the day, Savannah found Elias in the kitchen, washing crayon-stained hands at the industrial sink. "You didn't have to stay so late," she said, moving to stand beside him. "I wanted to." He dried his hands on a paper towel, then turned to face her. "Marcus showed me the picture he's been working on. It's for his mom. She's in the hospital right now." Savannah's heart clenched. She knew about Marcus's mother, about the family's struggles with medical bills and the uncertainty that came with a parent's serious illness. "The nurses let him visit after school," she said quietly. "He brings her a new drawing every day. He asked if I thought it would make her feel better." Elias's voice was rough around the edges. A 7-year-old worried about making his sick mother happy, and he's asking me, someone who's never had to worry about anything real in his entire life, for advice. What did you tell him? That his love was the best medicine she could get. That even if she was too tired to smile on the outside, seeing his pictures would make her smile on the inside. He met her eyes. Was that okay? I don't know how to talk to kids about serious things. The fact that he'd asked, that he genuinely cared about giving Marcus the right words, made something warm and dangerous unfurl in her chest. That was perfect, she whispered. They stood there in the empty kitchen, surrounded by the day's remnants, crumb-covered tables, abandoned juice boxes, crayon shavings scattered across the floor. It should have been mundane, even depressing. Instead, it felt sacred somehow. "Savannah," Elias said softly, "I know you have reasons to doubt my motives. I know my reputation precedes me, and not in a good way, but these past 2 weeks, like being here with these kids with you, it's the most real I've felt in years." She wanted to respond, but the words caught in her throat. "I'm not asking you to trust me," he continued. "I'm just asking you to let me keep trying to be someone worthy of your trust." The sincerity in his voice, the way he looked at her like she held something precious he was afraid to hope for, made her defenses waver. "Elias, I know I have a lot to prove," he said quickly, as if afraid she was about to reject him. "I know I've lived my whole life in ways that probably make you want to run in the opposite direction, but I swear to you, what I feel for you, it's not a game, it's not conquest, it's—" He trailed off, struggling with words. "It's what?" she asked breathlessly. "It's the first time I've ever wanted to be better than I am." And as the afternoon light faded through the kitchen windows, Savannah realized that despite all her careful defenses, despite every logical reason to protect her heart, she was already halfway to falling for a man who was learning to be worth catching. "I've never told anyone this before." The words slipped out before Savannah could stop them, hanging in the cool October air between her and Elias as they walked through Riverside Park. It was their first time together outside the community center, and she wasn't sure what had possessed her to suggest this walk. Maybe it was the way he'd looked when she'd mentioned needing fresh air after a particularly challenging day with the kids. Maybe it was the genuine concern in his eyes when he'd asked if she was okay. Or maybe she was just tired of being careful all the time. "Tell anyone what?" Elias asked gently, matching his longer stride to her slower pace. He'd shown up in jeans and a simple jacket again, but she was beginning to realize that his casual clothes were probably more expensive than most people's formal wear. Still, the effort to blend in, to not make her feel out of place, meant something. They'd been walking for 20 minutes, talking about everything and nothing. The changing leaves, Marcus's improvement in reading, the new volunteer who'd accidentally mixed salt into the kids' hot chocolate. Safe topics, comfortable topics. But something about the golden afternoon light and the way he listened, really listened, like her words mattered more than anything else in the world, had lowered her defenses. "I've never been kissed," she said quietly, then immediately felt heat flood her cheeks. "I mean, I've never been with anyone at all." Elias stopped walking so abruptly that she took 3 more steps before realizing he was no longer beside her. When she turned back, he was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, embarrassment making her voice tight. "I don't know why I said that. It's not exactly normal for someone my age, and I'm sure you think—" "Savannah." His voice was soft but firm enough to cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Why are you apologizing? Because it's weird? Because I sound like some sheltered little girl who doesn't know anything about the world?" She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed despite being fully clothed. "Because you've probably been with dozens of women who actually know what they're doing, and here I am, 22 years old and acting like—" "Stop!" He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something warm and understated that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. "Please, just stop." The gentleness in his voice made her look up at him, and what she saw in his dark eyes made her breath catch. "You think there's something wrong with you for waiting?" he said, not quite a question. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "And you think I'm going to judge you for it?" Another nod. Elias was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching her face. Around them, the park continued its lazy afternoon rhythm, joggers passing by, children playing on distant swings, elderly couples sharing benches and memories. But in their small bubble of space, everything felt suspended. "Can I tell you something?" he asked finally. She nodded again. "In all my years of dating, relationships, whatever you want to call them, I've never met anyone who chose to wait because they were looking for something real. Most people I know, myself included, treated intimacy like another transaction, something to get or give without much thought about what it meant. He paused, running a hand through his hair in what she was beginning to recognize as a nervous gesture. The fact that you've been intentional about it, that you've been waiting for someone who deserves that gift, that doesn't make you weird or sheltered. That makes you brave. Brave, the word came out as barely more than a whisper. It takes courage to hold out for what you really want when everyone around you is settling for less. His voice was rough with sincerity. It takes strength to protect something precious when the world tells you it doesn't matter. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She'd spent years feeling like something was wrong with her, like she was missing some essential part of the human experience. Her friends from college had all moved through relationships with casual ease, while she'd stood on the sidelines, too afraid of getting her heart broken to even try. My father always said I should wait for someone who saw me as more than just a conquest, she said softly. Someone who would value what I was offering, not just take it because it was available. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was protecting me, I think, from men like... She trailed off, realizing what she'd almost said. From men like me, Elias finished quietly. She looked up at him, seeing pain flicker across his features. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. And you were right too. He turned slightly, gazing out across the park. I've been exactly the kind of man your father was warning you about. I've taken intimacy without giving anything real in return. I've treated relationships like business deals, temporary arrangements with clear exit strategies. The honesty in his admission made her chest ache. But, he continued, turning back to face her, I've never wanted to be different until now. I've never met someone who made me want to earn something instead of just taking it. Elias, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I'm not trying to rush you or pressure you or convince you that I'm suddenly some different person. I'm just telling you that what you've chosen to protect, what you've been waiting for, it's not weird or old-fashioned or naive. It's beautiful, and whoever you eventually choose to share that with is going to be the luckiest person alive. The way he said whoever, like he wasn't assuming it would be him, like he was genuinely just happy for some hypothetical future person who might earn her trust, made something crack open inside her chest. They started walking again, the silence between them comfortable now rather than awkward. As they rounded a bend in the path, they came upon a small pond where an elderly couple sat feeding ducks from a park bench. 57 years, the woman was saying to the man, her voice carrying on the breeze, and you still save me the last piece of bread. Always will, Margaret, the man replied, pressing a kiss to her weathered hand. Always will. Savannah and Elias slowed their pace, both drawn to the simple intimacy of the moment. There was something so pure about it. Two people who'd chosen each other over and over again through decades of ordinary days and extraordinary challenges. That's what I want, Savannah said softly, the words escaping before she could think better of them. What? That. What they have. Someone who still chooses me after seeing all my flaws, all my ordinary moments, all the ways I'm not perfect. She glanced at him sideways. Someone who saves me the last piece of bread. Elias was quiet for so long that she wondered if she'd said something wrong, but when she looked at him, his expression was so tender, it made her breath catch. You deserve that, he said finally. You deserve someone who sees you as a gift, not a conquest. Someone who protects what you're offering instead of just taking it. The way he was looking at her, like she was something precious and fragile and worth protecting, made her feel brave in a way she'd never experienced before. What if, she said carefully, her heart hammering against her ribs, what if I think you might be that someone? He stopped walking again, turning to face her fully. Savannah, I'm scared, she admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush. I'm terrified that this is all too good to be true, that you'll get bored with me when you realize I don't know how to be sophisticated or exciting or any of the things the women in your world probably are. But I'm also scared that if I don't try, if I don't take this chance, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. You could never bore me, he said fiercely. You're the most interesting person I've ever met. You make me want to be better, do better, live better. You make me want to deserve you. Maybe, she said, taking a step closer to him, we can figure out how to deserve each other. And as the October sun began to set behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Elias Varden realized that for the first time in his life, he was holding something infinitely more valuable than money. He was holding someone's trust, someone's hope, someone's carefully guarded heart. And he would die before he let himself break it. This changes everything." The words whispered against her lips as Elias pulled back from their first kiss, his forehead resting against hers in the doorway of her small apartment. 3 weeks had passed since their walk in the park, 3 weeks of stolen moments and careful conversations, of him picking her up after her volunteer shifts and driving her home through the quiet streets of Queens. Tonight had been different. Tonight he'd asked if he could walk her to her door, instead of just watching from the car until she was safely inside. Tonight, when she'd turned to say goodnight, something in the air between them had shifted, become electric and inevitable. And when he'd cupped her face in his hands and asked, "Can I kiss you?" in a voice rough with barely contained longing, she'd simply nodded and let her eyes fall closed. The kiss had been everything she'd imagined and nothing like she'd expected. Gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might disappear. But when she'd responded, when her hands had fisted in his jacket and pulled him closer, something had ignited between them. Something that made her understand finally why people wrote songs about moments like this. "Savannah." He breathed her name like a prayer, his thumbs tracing the curve of her cheekbones. "I've never felt anything like this." "Neither have I," she whispered back, and saw something flicker in his dark eyes. Possession, maybe, or pride, or something deeper that made her pulse race. "I should go," he said, but he didn't move away. "I should let you get some sleep." "You should," she agreed, but her hands were still gripping his jacket, still holding him close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. They stood there in the hallway of her modest apartment building, neither willing to be the first to break the spell. The fluorescent light overhead flickered intermittently, casting shadows that danced across his face, and she thought absently that she'd never seen anything more beautiful than Elias Varden looking at her like she was his entire world. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "let me take you somewhere special. Not the community center, not a walk through the park, somewhere that's just ours." "Where?" she asked, though she would have followed him anywhere in that moment. "Trust me?" The question was loaded with more than just plans for tomorrow. He was asking if she trusted him with her heart, with her carefully guarded dreams, with the future she'd been protecting for 22 years. "Yes," she said simply, and watched relief flood his features. He kissed her again then, slower this time, deeper, and she felt herself melting into him like she was coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers once more. "Sweet dreams, Savannah Pierce," he murmured. "Sweet dreams, Elias Varden," she replied, and watched him walk away with that confident stride that had once intimidated her and now made her feel chosen, special, like she was the only woman in the world worth walking away from, reluctantly. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call that shattered the perfect bubble they'd been building around themselves. "Daddy?" Savannah answered her phone while pouring coffee, surprised to hear from her father so early. "Sweetheart," Thaddeus Pierce's voice carried a tension she didn't recognize. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Something in his tone made her set down her mug carefully. "What is it? Are you seeing Elias Varden?" The question hit like a physical blow. Her father's voice wasn't angry exactly, but there was something there, disappointment maybe, or fear, that made her stomach clench. "Why are you asking?" she said carefully. "Because Harrison called me this morning. Apparently his son has been spending a lot of time in Queens lately, and people are starting to talk. Business associates, social circles, the kind of people who make it their business to know where the Varden heir spends his time." Savannah felt the walls of her small kitchen closing in around her. "Daddy, I can explain. Honey, I'm not angry. I'm worried. Do you have any idea what you're getting yourself into?" The question stung because she'd been asking herself the same thing for weeks. He's not what people think he is. Maybe not. But the world he comes from is exactly what people think it is. "Savannah, I've done business with the Vardens for 20 years. I respect Harrison, I consider him a friend, but their world, it's not kind to outsiders, especially not to young women who don't understand the rules." "What rules?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "The rules that say people like us are temporary entertainment for people like them. The rules that say when the novelty wears off, when his family starts pressuring him to settle down with someone from his own social class, someone suitable, we're the ones who get hurt." Each word landed like a stone in her chest. "Daddy, you don't know Elias. He's different. He cares about me." "I'm sure he does, sweetheart. Right now. But caring isn't the same as choosing, and choosing isn't the same as staying. Not in his world." After she hung up, Savannah sat in her kitchen staring at her untouched coffee until it grew cold. Her father's words echoed in her mind, mixing with every doubt she'd ever had about herself, every insecurity about not being sophisticated enough, worldly enough, rich enough to belong in Elias's life. By the time Elias arrived that afternoon to pick her up, she'd worked herself into a state of barely controlled panic. "You're quiet," he observed as they drove through Manhattan traffic. He'd been secretive about their destination, but she could tell they were heading toward the more expensive parts of the city, the parts where she always felt like an imposter. "My father called this morning," she said without preamble. She felt him tense beside her, his hands tightening slightly on the steering wheel. "What did he say?" "That people are talking about us, about you slumming it in Queens with the partner's daughter." "Savannah, is that what this is?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "Are you slumming it? Having a little adventure with the innocent girl from the wrong side of town before you go back to your real life?" He pulled the car over so abruptly that she grabbed the door handle for support. They were stopped on a side street in the village, brownstones and boutiques creating a backdrop that looked like something from a movie about lives she'd never live. "Look at me," he said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. When she didn't immediately comply, he reached over and gently turned her face toward his. "Look at me, Savannah." She met his eyes and saw hurt there, and anger, and something that looked almost like panic. "Is that really what you think of me?" he asked quietly. "After everything we've shared, everything I've told you, you think I'm playing some kind of game?" "I don't know what to think," she whispered, hating the way her voice broke. "Your world is so different from mine, Elias. Your father's business associates are talking about us like I'm some kind of scandal. How long before you start seeing me the way they do?" "Never," he said fiercely. "Do you hear me? Never. But what happens when what? When my family disapproves? When society pages start gossiping? When people I've never cared about have opinions about my choices?" He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away tears she didn't realize had started falling. "Savannah, I don't give a damn what anyone thinks about us. The only opinion that matters is yours. That's easy to say now, but it's not easy. Nothing about this is easy. Falling for you, changing everything I thought I knew about myself, wanting something real for the first time in my life. None of it's easy, but it's worth it. You're worth it." The sincerity in his voice, the way he was looking at her like she was the most important thing in his universe, made her want to believe him, made her want to forget about disapproving families and social expectations and all the ways this could go wrong. "Where were you taking me?" she asked softly. "My apartment," he said, then quickly added, "Not for what you're thinking. I wanted to cook for you. I wanted to show you something I've never shown anyone else." "What?" "The man I am when I'm not trying to be what everyone expects. The man I want to be for you." And despite every warning voice in her head, despite every logical reason to protect her heart, Savannah found herself nodding, choosing trust over fear, choosing him over safety, choosing love over the comfortable distance that had kept her heart whole but empty for 22 years. This isn't who I really am. Elias's penthouse was everything Savannah had expected, and nothing like she'd prepared herself for. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Manhattan's skyline, while abstract paintings, that probably cost more than her father's annual salary, hung on pristine white walls. The furniture was sleek, modern, expensive, and somehow completely impersonal, like a high-end hotel suite rather than someone's home. But it was the kitchen that stopped her cold. Unlike the rest of the apartment's sterile perfection, the kitchen showed signs of actual use. Cookbooks with worn spines lined a shelf beside the stove. A well-seasoned cast-iron pan hung from a hook near the window. Fresh herbs grew in small pots on the windowsill, and she could see flour dusting the marble countertop. "You actually cook," she said, surprised. Surprised? Elias hung his keys on a hook by the door, and she noticed his hands were shaking slightly. He was nervous, she realized. In his own home, he was nervous to have her there. "A little," she admitted. "I figured someone like you would have a chef, or just order from expensive restaurants every night. I did for years, but cooking—" He moved to the kitchen, running his fingers over the countertop like it was a touchstone. "It's the one thing I do that's just for me. Not for business, not for image, not because anyone expects it, just because I enjoy it." There was something so vulnerable about the admission that it made her chest ache. This man who commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals found peace in something as simple as preparing food with his own hands. "What were you going to make me?" she asked softly. "Pasta." He looked almost embarrassed. "Nothing fancy. My grandmother's recipe. My mother's mother, not the society matron everyone knew. She died when I was 12, but she taught me to make her marinara sauce from scratch, It's probably the only genuine thing I inherited from my family. The way he said it, like authenticity was something rare and precious in his world, made her understand him in a way she never had before. He wasn't just wealthy. He was trapped by that wealth, suffocated by expectations and appearances, until he'd almost forgotten who he really was underneath it all. "I'd love that," she said, as he began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator, fresh tomatoes, basil, garlic. She noticed something that made her heart skip. On the refrigerator door, held by a simple magnet, was the drawing Marcus had made of his mother, the one from art class, with the carefully crafted smile and the crinkled eyes that showed real happiness. "You kept it," she said, touching the paper gently. "He gave it to me," Elias said, following her gaze. "Said I helped make it special, so I should have a copy too. I've never—" He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I've never had a child give me anything before. Not because they wanted something from me, not because their parents told them to, just because they wanted to share something that made them happy." The raw honesty in his voice broke something open inside her chest. This man who had everything money could buy treasured a crayon drawing from a 7-year-old more than any of his expensive possessions. "Tell me about your grandmother," she said, settling onto a bar stool to watch him work. As he began chopping garlic with practiced precision, Elias started talking about Sunday dinners in a tiny kitchen in Brooklyn before his family's fortune grew, about learning to knead dough standing on a step stool beside a woman who spoke broken English but perfect love, about how his grandmother had died just as his father's business began to really take off, taking with her the last person who saw him as just Elias instead of the Varden heir. "She used to say that food made with love tastes different," he said, adding olive oil to a pan with a practiced flick of his wrist, "that you could tell when someone cooked just to nourish versus when they cooked to show off. She sounds wonderful. She was the only person who ever saw me for who I really was instead of what I represented." He glanced up at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Until you." The words hung between them as he continued cooking, the kitchen filling with the warm scents of garlic and basil. Savannah watched his hands as he worked, confident, gentle, creating something beautiful from simple ingredients, and felt herself falling deeper into love with this man who was so much more complex than she'd ever imagined. "Can I ask you something?" she said as he stirred the sauce. "When you were with other women, the models, the socialites, did you ever bring them here?" His hand stilled on the wooden spoon. "Yes," he said quietly. The admission stung, even though she'd known it was coming. "But," he continued, turning to face her fully, "I never cooked for them. I never told them about my grandmother. I never showed them Marcus's drawing or talked about what the community center means to me. This, what we're doing right now, I've never shared this with anyone." "Why me?" she whispered. "Because you make me want to be real. Because when you look at me, I don't see calculation or agenda or someone trying to figure out what I'm worth. I see someone who might actually care about who I am underneath all the noise." He moved closer, stopping just in front of her stool. "Because you're the first person I've ever met who makes me feel like I might be enough, just as I am." The vulnerability in his admission made her want to cry. This man who seemed to have everything was starving for something she'd never thought to value: simple acceptance, genuine connection, someone who loved him for his heart instead of his bank account. "Elias," she said softly, reaching out to touch his face, "you are enough. You've always been enough." He leaned into her touch like a man dying of thirst. "I'm so afraid you're going to realize you deserve better than someone who spent 34 years being shallow and selfish. And I'm afraid you're going to realize you could have anyone in the world, someone sophisticated and glamorous who actually belongs in places like this." They looked at each other across the kitchen island, both of them afraid, both of them hoping, both of them balanced on the knife's edge between safety and love. "What if we're both wrong?" he said finally. "What if we're exactly what each other needs?" Before she could answer, his phone rang. The sound cut through the intimate atmosphere like a blade, and she saw him glance at the screen with a frown. "It's my father," he said, conflict clear in his voice. "Answer it," she said, though something cold was settling in her stomach. "Elias, we need to talk." Harrison Varden's voice was loud enough that she could hear it from across the kitchen. "About your recent activities." "I'm busy right now, Dad." "I'm sure you are. But this can't wait. I've been getting calls all day, from board members, from business associates, from people who matter to this company's reputation. Apparently, you've been seen around town with Thaddeus Pierce's daughter." Savannah felt the blood drain from her face. She started to get up to give him privacy, but Elias caught her hand, holding her in place. What I do in my personal time isn't anyone's business, Elias said, his voice carefully controlled. It is when it affects the company, when it affects our family's standing in the community. Son, I like Thaddeus, and I'm sure his daughter is a lovely girl, but you have to understand how this looks. How does it look, Dad? Like you're having a midlife crisis at 34. Like you're rebelling against your responsibilities by playing house with someone completely inappropriate. The word inappropriate hit Savannah like a slap. She tried to pull her hand away, but Elias tightened his grip, his eyes never leaving her face. She's not inappropriate, Elias said, his voice dangerously quiet. She's perfect. Perfect for what? A fling? A walk on the wild side? Elias, be realistic. This girl doesn't belong in our world, and deep down, you know it. And as Harrison Varden's words echoed through the beautiful, sterile apartment, Savannah realized that no matter how much Elias cared for her, no matter how real their connection felt, they were about to face the harsh reality that love alone might not be enough to bridge the gap between their worlds. Choose carefully, son. Some decisions can't be undone. The Varden family boardroom had always intimidated Elias, even as a child when his father would bring him to educational meetings. The massive mahogany table, the oil paintings of long-dead Varden patriarchs staring down from gilded frames, the windows that looked out over Manhattan like a kingdom to be conquered, it was all designed to remind anyone who entered exactly who held the power. Today, facing his father across that imposing table, Elias felt 8 years old again. But then he thought of Savannah, of how she'd looked when his father's words had hit her like physical blows, and suddenly he felt every inch of his 34 years. "You hung up on me last night," Harrison said without preamble, his steel-grey eyes fixed on his son. "That was disrespectful." "You called the woman I love inappropriate," Elias replied evenly. "That was unacceptable." "Love?" Harrison's eyebrows rose. "Son, you've known this girl for what, 6 weeks? You don't know what love is." "Don't I?" Elias settled back in his chair, a calm descending over him that surprised them both. "Then tell me, Dad, what is love? Is it the arrangement you had with Mom? The merger disguised as a marriage that lasted 23 years without a single genuine conversation?" Harrison's face darkened. "Your mother and I built something stable, something lasting. We understood our responsibilities to the family, to the company, to our social obligations. You built a beautiful prison," Elias said quietly, "and you've been trying to lock me inside it my entire life. I've been trying to prepare you for your destiny. You're the heir to a billion-dollar empire, Elias. That comes with obligations, expectations to marry someone suitable, someone from the right family, with the right connections, who'll smile pretty at charity galas and never challenge me to be better than I am." "Someone who understands our world," Harrison corrected. "Someone who won't be overwhelmed by the pressures, the scrutiny, the responsibilities that come with our name." Elias thought of Savannah reading to children, of the way she'd cleaned up spilled water without thinking twice, of how she'd looked at his expensive apartment like it was beautiful but irrelevant to who he was as a person. "Savannah isn't overwhelmed by our world," he said. "She's unimpressed by it, and that terrifies you. It should terrify you too. Son, be realistic. What happens when the novelty wears off? When you realize you have nothing in common beyond physical attraction? When she realizes that being with you means living under a microscope, being judged and criticized by people who will never accept her?" Each word was calculated to wound, to plant seeds of doubt, and Elias could see the strategy behind it. His father had built an empire by identifying weaknesses and exploiting them, but this wasn't a business negotiation. This was his life. "What happens," Elias said slowly, "is that I get to spend my life with someone who makes me want to be worthy of her love, someone who sees the best in broken 7-year-olds and cynical billionaires alike. Someone who chose to wait 22 years for something real instead of settling for something convenient." 22 years. Harrison's voice sharpened with interest. "She's never been with anyone? That's not your business. It is if you're thinking of making this permanent." "Elias, think about what you're saying. An inexperienced girl from a middle-class family, someone who has no idea how to navigate our social circles or support your career." "Stop!" The word came out like a whip crack, silencing Harrison mid-sentence. "Stop talking about her like she's a business acquisition you're evaluating. Stop reducing the woman I love to a list of assets and liabilities." "Then you tell me," Harrison said, leaning forward. "What does she bring to this relationship besides sentiment? How does she advance your position, support your ambitions, strengthen the Varden name?" "She makes me happy," Elias said simply. For the first time in my life, I wake up excited about the day ahead, instead of just going through the motions. She makes me want to use our money and influence for something meaningful, instead of just accumulating more of both. She makes me feel like I'm enough just as I am, not because of what I own or what I can buy. Happiness fades, Harrison said dismissively. Compatibility matters more than passion in the long run. You're right, Elias agreed, surprising his father. Compatibility does matter, but not the kind you're talking about. I'm compatible with someone who challenges me to be better, someone who values kindness over connections, substance over status, someone who would rather read to children than attend another meaningless charity gala. And what about children? Harrison's voice took on a calculating edge. Have you thought about that? About raising the next generation of Vardens with someone who doesn't understand their heritage, their responsibilities? For the first time in the conversation, Elias smiled. I've thought about it constantly, about having kids who grow up knowing that wealth is a tool, not a trophy, about raising children who understand that their worth isn't tied to their bank account, about giving them what I never had, parents who love each other genuinely, not just conveniently. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, studying his son's face. When he spoke again, his voice was softer but somehow more dangerous. I had hoped you'd outgrow this phase on your own, he said, but I can see you're more serious than I realized. Dead serious. Then let me be equally clear. If you continue this relationship, if you insist on making a spectacle of yourself with this girl, there will be consequences. What kind of consequences? The board has been questioning your judgment lately, your sudden interest in community work, your absence from important social functions, your general disregard for the image expected of someone in your position. Harrison's voice was cold now, businesslike. If you marry beneath your class, if you embarrass this family publicly, they might decide you're not suited for leadership after all. The threat hung in the air between them like a blade. Elias felt something cold settle in his chest, not fear exactly, but a crystalline clarity about what was really at stake. Are you saying you'd remove me as heir? I'm saying the board might make that decision for me. And if they did, if you found yourself cut off from the family fortune, how long do you think your little love story would last? How would Miss Pierce feel about choosing love over security when security meant never having to worry about paying rent or buying groceries? The cruelty of the suggestion, that Savannah would abandon him if he lost his money, made Elias's jaw clench. But beneath the anger was something else, a growing certainty about what really mattered. You want to know the difference between you and me, Dad? Elias stood slowly, straightening his tie with deliberate calm. You think money is what makes people stay. I've learned that it's usually what makes them leave. Meaning Savannah has never asked me for anything. Not dinner at expensive restaurants, not jewelry, not access to my social circle. She doesn't want my money. She wants me. And if I lost every penny tomorrow, I know she'd still choose me over any other man in the world. You're gambling everything on a fantasy, Harrison said, but there was something almost desperate in his voice now. I'm choosing love over fear, Elias corrected. Something you never had the courage to do. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. I'm going to ask her to marry me, he said without turning around. And when she says yes, and she will say yes because we love each other in a way you've never understood, I hope you'll find a way to be happy for us. But if you can't, if you choose your precious image over your son's happiness, then you'll have to live with that choice. Elias, I spent 34 years being the son you wanted instead of the man I was meant to be, Elias said, finally turning back to face him. I won't spend the rest of my life making that same mistake. And as he walked out of the boardroom, leaving his father speechless behind the mahogany table, Elias Varden realized he'd just drawn a line in the sand that would change everything, and for the first time in his life, he was completely at peace with the consequences. I have something to ask you, and I need you to know that your answer changes everything. The rooftop garden of Elias's building was a hidden oasis 30 floors above the chaos of Manhattan. String lights twinkled between carefully tended plants, and the city sparkled beyond the glass barriers like a field of fallen stars. He'd spent all afternoon up here, pacing among the roses and herbs, rehearsing words that seemed inadequate for everything he was feeling. When the elevator opened and Savannah stepped out, wearing the simple blue dress she'd worn to their first meeting, his heart stopped completely. This is beautiful, she said softly, taking in the garden, the candles he'd lit, the small table set for two with takeout containers from their favorite diner in Queens. You did all this? I wanted it to be perfect, he said, his voice rougher than intended. I wanted to give you something beautiful that was just ours. She moved closer, and he could see concern in her dark eyes. Elias, what's wrong? You sounded strange on the phone, and you look like you haven't slept. He hadn't slept. After the confrontation with his father, he'd spent the night walking the streets of Manhattan, thinking about everything he was about to risk, everything he was willing to lose for the woman standing in front of him. I had a meeting with my father yesterday, he said carefully. Her face went pale. About us, about our future, about the fact that I'm in love with you, and I don't care who approves or disapproves. Elias, let me finish, he said gently, taking her hands in his. Please, I need to say this. She nodded, but he could see the fear building in her eyes. My father thinks you're inappropriate for me. He thinks our relationship is a phase, a rebellion, something I'll outgrow when I remember my responsibilities to the family business and our social standing. Each word was a knife twist, and he watched them land on her like physical blows. He's wrong, Elias continued, his voice growing stronger, about all of it. What I feel for you isn't a phase. It's the first real thing I've ever experienced. You're not inappropriate, you're perfect. And if loving you is rebellion, then I want to be a rebel for the rest of my life. But your family, your business, will survive without me if they have to. But I won't survive without you. The words hung between them in the candlelit air, heavy with meaning and possibility, and the kind of risk that either destroys everything or transforms it completely. Savannah, he said, dropping to one knee right there among the rooftop roses, pulling out a ring that wasn't the massive diamond his world would expect, but a simple, perfect solitaire that caught the city lights like captured starshine. I know this is fast. I know we're from different worlds. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this might not work. Tears were streaming down her face now, her hands pressed to her mouth as if she could hold back the sob building in her chest. But I also know that I've never been happier than I am with you. I've never been more myself than when I'm making you laugh, or reading stories to kids at the community center, or just sitting in terrible diner coffee shops talking about our dreams. His voice broke slightly. I love you, Savannah Pierce. Not because you're beautiful, though you are. Not because you're kind, though you are. I love you because you see the man I could be and make me want to become him. Elias, she whispered. Marry me, he said simply. Marry me and let's build something real together. Something that matters. Something that lasts not because we're supposed to be together, but because we choose to be. For a moment that felt like eternity. She just stared at him, tears reflecting the city lights, her whole future balanced on the edge of her next words. Yes, she breathed. Yes, of course, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and relief and desperate joy flooding through him. She tasted like tears and hope and the promise of every tomorrow he'd ever wanted. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I love you so much it terrifies me. Why does it terrify you? She pulled back to look at him, and something in her expression made his heart skip, because I know what this means. What we're going to have to face. Before he could ask what she meant, his phone rang. The sound cut through their perfect moment like a blade, and when he saw his father's name on the screen, something cold settled in his stomach. Don't answer it, Savannah said, but her voice was already resigned. I have to, he said. If we're going to do this, if we're going to build a life together, I need to face whatever's coming. Elias, Harrison's voice was colder than winter when he answered. I assume you haven't changed your mind about your little infatuation. If you mean have I changed my mind about marrying the woman I love, then no. The silence on the other end stretched so long that Elias wondered if the call had dropped. I see, Harrison said finally. Then you should know that as of this morning the board has voted. You're being removed as heir to the company, effective immediately. The words hit like a physical blow, but somehow Elias found he wasn't surprised. I see. Your trust fund will remain intact until you're 35, as per your grandfather's will. But your position in the company, your access to business accounts, your role in family decisions, all of that ends now. And if I break up with Savannah, if I end this relationship and come crawling back, then we can discuss reinstating you, assuming you make more appropriate choices going forward. Elias looked at Savannah, who was watching his face with growing alarm, and felt a strange peace settle over him. Then I guess this is goodbye, Dad. Don't be dramatic, son. You have time to reconsider. But not much time. The announcement will be made public tomorrow unless you change your mind. After he hung up, Savannah took his hands in hers, her engagement ring catching the light. What did he say? They've removed me as heir, cut me off from the business. If the announcement goes public tomorrow, everyone will know I chose you over the family fortune. He expected to see panic in her eyes, or regret, or the dawning realization of what she'd signed up for. Instead, he saw something that made his breath catch. Fierce, protective love. Then we'll face it together, she said simply. You and me against the world. Savannah, you don't understand what this means. The scrutiny, the gossip, the way people will treat you. I understand that the man I love just gave up $1 billion inheritance to be with me, she interrupted. I understand that you chose us over everything else, and I understand that if our love can survive that kind of sacrifice, it can survive anything. But even as she said the words, even as she held him close under the starlit sky, Savannah felt something dark and frightened uncurling in her chest. Because tomorrow, when the news broke, when the whole world knew that Elias Varden had been disowned for love, they would both discover exactly what that love was really worth. And in the distance, like thunder before a storm, she could already hear the sound of their perfect world beginning to crumble. Sometimes loving someone means letting them go. The headlines were everywhere. Varden heir disowned for love. Billionaire's son loses fortune over mystery woman. The fall of a dynasty. Elias Varden's shocking choice. Savannah stared at her phone screen in the break room of the community center, reading article after article about their engagement, each one more invasive than the last. Somehow the media had gotten hold of her photo, her background, even details about her father's business relationship with the Vardens. Sources close to the family describe Pierce as a naive small-town girl who has clearly manipulated the young heir. Friends worry that Varden has been seduced by someone completely inappropriate for his social standing. The question everyone is asking, what kind of woman destroys a man's relationship with his family? Each word was like a physical blow. She'd known there would be scrutiny, but she hadn't imagined this. The complete character assassination, the way reporters had twisted their love story into something calculating and predatory. You shouldn't be reading that garbage, Keisha said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee. It's all lies and speculation. Is it? Savannah's voice was barely above a whisper. What if they're right? What if I am destroying his life? That man chose you, Keisha said firmly. Nobody forced him to give up his inheritance. He made that choice because you're worth more to him than all their money. But even as her friend spoke, Savannah could feel doubt creeping in like poison. The past 3 days had been a nightmare of constant media attention. Photographers camped outside her apartment, reporters calling the community center pretending to be interested in volunteer opportunities just to get quotes about her. And through it all, Elias had been trying to shield her, fielding calls from lawyers and PR specialists, his jaw tight with the strain of watching the woman he loved being torn apart in public. The breaking point came that afternoon. Savannah was reading to the children when she noticed Marcus sitting apart from the group, his usual bright smile replaced by confusion and sadness. During snack time, she pulled him aside. Hey, buddy, you seem upset today. What's wrong? Marcus looked up at her with 7-year-old eyes that held too much worry. Miss Savannah, are you really a bad person like they said on TV? The question hit her like a sledgehammer. What did they say on TV, sweetheart? My mom was watching the news and they showed your picture. They said you were trying to steal Mr. Elias's money and that you were making his family sad. His small voice broke slightly. But you're not bad. You read to us and you help with my drawings, and you never ask for money. Savannah knelt down to his level, her heart breaking. Marcus, listen to me. Sometimes grown-ups say things that aren't true because they don't understand. You know who I really am, right? He nodded, but she could see the seeds of doubt that had been planted by adult cruelty. That evening, when Elias arrived to pick her up, she could see the toll the past few days had taken on him. His usually perfect appearance was rumpled. There were dark circles under his eyes and his hands shook slightly as he helped her into his car. We need to talk, she said quietly. He nodded, driving them to the small park where they'd had their first real conversation. As they sat on a bench overlooking the pond, where the elderly couple had fed ducks just weeks ago, Savannah felt like she was looking at the remnants of a different life. I can't do this anymore, Elias. The words fell between them like stones, and she watched his face go completely still. Can't do what? This. Us. I can't watch you lose everything because of me. I can't have 7-year-olds asking me if I'm a bad person because the news says I'm destroying your life. Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice remained steady. I can't be the reason you're cut off from your family. Savannah, we talked about this. We knew it would be hard. Hard? She turned to face him fully and he flinched at the pain in her eyes. Elias, they're calling me a gold digger. They're saying I seduced you to get access to your money. They're camped outside the community center, disrupting the kids' programs, all because I fell in love with you. The media attention will die down. Will it? Or will this follow us forever? Will our children someday have to defend their mother against accusations that she trapped their father? She twisted the engagement ring on her finger, the diamond catching the last light of sunset. Will you wake up in 5 years or 10 and wonder if maybe they were right? Maybe you could have done better? Never, he said fiercely, reaching for her hands. Savannah, I love you. None of the rest matters. It does matter, she whispered. Your father called me today. Elias went rigid. What did he say? He offered me money. A lot of money. Enough to pay for my graduate school, to help my father expand his business, to set me up for life. She met his eyes, and the devastation she saw there nearly broke her resolve. All I had to do was break up with you and disappear. Please tell me you didn't. I told him I'd rather live in poverty with you than in luxury without you. Fresh tears spilled over. But then I started thinking, what if he's right? What if I'm being selfish? What if loving you means letting you go back to your real life? This is my real life, Elias said desperately. You're my real life. Everything before you was just existing. But look what it's cost you, your family, your business, your future. My future is with you. Is it? The question hung between them like a challenge. Because right now all I see is a man who's given up everything and gotten nothing but heartache in return. They sat in silence as darkness fell around them, both of them crying, both of them holding onto each other like drowning people clinging to driftwood. What are you saying? Elias finally whispered. Savannah looked at him, really looked at him, memorizing every detail of his face, storing up this moment before everything changed forever. I'm saying I love you too much to let you sacrifice everything for me. I'm saying you deserve better than a woman who brings chaos into your life. I'm saying... Her voice broke completely. I'm saying goodbye. She slipped the ring off her finger and pressed it into his palm, closing his fingers around it even as he tried to pull away. Savannah, please, we can fight this together. We can... No, she said, standing up and stepping back before she lost her courage. We can't. 'Cause every day we fight this, every day you choose me over them, you lose a little more of yourself, and I won't be the reason the man I love becomes someone he doesn't recognize. So that's it? His voice was raw with anguish. You're just going to walk away? Give up on us because it's hard? I'm walking away because it's impossible. She took another step back, putting distance between them before she changed her mind. And because loving someone sometimes means wanting what's best for them, even when it destroys you. As she turned to leave, she heard him call her name one last time, his voice breaking on the syllables like a prayer or a curse. But she didn't turn around. She couldn't, because if she looked at him one more time, if she saw the love and devastation in his eyes, she would run back to him and damn the consequences. Instead, she walked away from the only man she'd ever loved, leaving him sitting alone by the pond with an engagement ring in his palm and the ruins of their perfect world scattered around his feet. And as the city lights blurred through her tears, Savannah Pierce wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life or the most selfless act of love she was capable of. 2 years later, some love stories don't end, they just begin again. The small elementary school in Charleston, South Carolina, was nothing like the grand institutions Savannah had once dreamed of creating. It occupied a converted Victorian house with creaky floors and windows that stuck, but every room was filled with laughter, colorful artwork, and the kind of genuine learning that money couldn't buy. Savannah stood in her classroom, watching her first-grade students work on their reading comprehension, and felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years. Complete peace. She'd built this. After leaving New York, after using the money she'd saved working at the community center, after countless nights wondering if she'd made the right choice, she'd finally created the school she'd always envisioned. Small, personal, focused on nurturing each child's unique gifts rather than preparing them for standardized tests. Miss Pierce, little Emma tugged on her dress. There's a man at the door. Savannah looked up from the book she was helping Timothy sound out, expecting to see a parent or perhaps the maintenance worker who'd promised to fix the stubborn window in the art room. Instead, she saw him. Elias stood in her doorway looking nothing like the polished businessman she remembered. His hair was longer, slightly mussed from what looked like a long drive. He wore simple jeans and a white button-down shirt that had seen better days, but his eyes, Those dark eyes that had haunted her dreams for 2 years were exactly the same. "Children," she said, her voice somehow steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest, "why don't you continue reading quietly while I step outside for a moment?" Her hands were shaking as she followed him into the hallway, closing the classroom door behind her. They stood there for a long moment, just looking at each other, the weight of 2 years and all their unspoken words hanging between them. "You found me?" she whispered finally. "It took a while," he said, his voice rougher than she remembered. "You're very good at disappearing." "I had to." The words came out broken. "Elias, what are you doing here?" Instead of answering immediately, he looked around the small school at the children's artwork covering the walls, the mismatched furniture that somehow created perfect learning spaces, the windows that let in golden South Carolina sunshine. "You did it," he said softly. "You built your school. It's not much. It's everything." He turned back to her, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. "It's exactly what you said you wanted. A place where kids can just be kids, where learning happens through love instead of pressure." "Elias, we can't." She was struggling to form coherent thoughts with him standing so close, looking at her like she was everything he'd been searching for. "I know what you're thinking," he said gently. "You're thinking about the media, about my family, about all the reasons you walked away. But things have changed, Savannah." "What do you mean?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a newspaper, not one of the gossip rags that had torn them apart, but a respectable business journal. The headline read, "Varden Industries announces new leadership as Harrison Varden steps down." "Your father retired?" "Heart attack," Elias said quietly. 6 months ago. Not serious, but enough to make him reevaluate his priorities. He asked me to come back, to take over the company." Savannah felt her heart sink. Of course. He'd gotten everything back. His inheritance, his position, his place in the world she could never belong to. "Congratulations," she managed. "I'm happy for you." I said no. The words hit her like lightning. "What?" I turned him down. The board offered me full control, complete reinstatement, everything I'd lost. He stepped closer, and she could smell that familiar cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. And I realized I didn't want it anymore. "But it's your legacy, your birthright." "My birthright is loving you," he said simply. "Everything else is just noise." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she shook her head. "Elias, you can't just throw away your life again for me. I won't let you. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing what matters." He cupped her face in his hands, just like he had that night on the rooftop garden. "Do you want to know what I've been doing for the past 2 years? She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I started my own company, small-scale development, but focused on communities that actually need help. Schools, community centers, affordable housing. I used my trust fund as seed money and built something real, something that matters." His thumbs wiped away her tears. "I learned how to be the man you saw in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. I don't understand. I understand if you can't forgive me for not fighting harder for us. I understand if 2 years is too long, if you've moved on, if..." "Moved on?" The words came out as a broken laugh. "Elias, I haven't gone on a single date. I haven't even looked at another man. I've spent 2 years trying to convince myself I did the right thing, but every morning I wake up missing you so much I can barely breathe." Hope flared in his eyes. "Then come home with me." "Where's home?" "Wherever you are." He pulled the engagement ring from his pocket, the same simple, perfect solitaire she'd given back to him in the park. "I kept this, just in case, just hoping that someday you might be ready to try again." "Elias," she stared at the ring, at the man holding it, at the impossible second chance she'd never dared to dream of. "What about your family? What about the media? My father and I have made peace. It turns out nearly losing your son makes you reconsider what's really important." "As for the media," he shrugged, "let them talk. I've learned that the opinions of strangers matter a lot less than the love of one extraordinary woman. The children, my school, keep it, expand it, build 10 more just like it. I'll fund them all if you want." He got down on one knee right there in the hallway of her small school, just like he had on that rooftop 2 years ago. "But do it as my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life supporting your dreams, instead of asking you to sacrifice them for mine." Through the classroom window, she could see her students watching with wide eyes and barely contained excitement. In the distance, she could hear the sounds of children playing outside, their laughter mixing with the warm southern breeze. This was her world, small, simple, real, and somehow Impossibly, he was asking to be part of it. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, as he stood and kissed her with 2 years of longing and love, her classroom erupted in cheers from the children who'd been watching through the window. Emma was jumping up and down, Timothy was clapping, and somewhere in the back of her mind, Savannah realized that this was what love looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but real and chosen and strong enough to survive separation and doubt and the cruel opinions of a world that didn't understand. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too," he whispered back. "Always have, always will." That evening, as they sat on the front porch of her small house, sharing takeout from the local diner and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Savannah thought about the elderly couple they'd seen feeding ducks so long ago. 57 years, the woman had said, "and you still save me the last piece of bread." "Always will," the man had replied. Looking at Elias, older now, wiser, more himself than he'd ever been when he was trying to be what everyone expected, Savannah finally understood what forever looked like. It looked like choosing each other, again and again, through every storm. It looked like love that was strong enough to let go and brave enough to fight for a second chance. It looked like two people who'd learned that the best love stories don't end with happily ever after. They begin with, "Let's try again." And as the first stars appeared in the South Carolina sky, Elias Varden and Savannah Pierce knew they had the rest of their lives to prove that some love really is strong enough to conquer everything, including time, distance, and the fear that had once driven them apart. What do you think? Did Savannah make the right choice by waiting for love to find its way back to her? Sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones where people have to lose each other to realize what truly matters. Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.